Welcome back to Ty and That Guy. I'm Wes Chatham, and this is my good buddy Ty Franck, and we are coming at you live.
We'll do it live.
Do it live. Ty, can you tell what we're going to talk about today? When you hear this, does this make you feel medieval Italy? The 13th century Italy?
I think what we're about to talk about today is the biggest divide ever in history between the quality of a movie and the quality of its soundtrack. One of my favorite movies growing up with one of the worst soundtracks I've ever heard. The classic Ladyhawke, which had a story taking place in like Dark Ages Europe and had a soundtrack that belonged in like a disco or something. Like what the fuck was up with that soundtrack?
Yeah, I mean, the Alan Parsons Band too, like experiment. They were doing some like interesting stuff at the time, but this is just not the interesting stuff that they were doing. And so Dick Donner was, when he was scouting this movie, he kept listening to the Alan Parsons Project, and he said, I couldn't get out of my head, and it infused with the movie and was kind of connecting the movie. And it's like, well, then put the shit that you were listening to in the movie. Don't put this shit, because somebody else wrote it. Alan Parsons didn't write this. Because, you know, John Williams was a possibility of, you know, and it's like, God, how would that have been if John Williams did the score for this?
It would have been better.
It would have been better.
I think the answer is clearly better.
Joseph sent us a rescore.
Yeah, movie. I watched it.
Yeah, what did you think?
I think it's so much better. I mean, and obviously it's an amateur rescore. Like the person who did it is not like a professional, you know, movie composer or whatever. And they used music from another movie, but just tonally, it just fits so much better. Like every time Rutger Hauer is charging across a field on his horse, which happens multiple times, and the music comes in. Yes.
Yeah, you know what's funny is like that other score is not the greatest score, and it's not even really like designed for it. But the movie's so much better with it.
It's
because
so much
immediately
better.
Doesn't take you out. I know you're going to set the movie up in a little bit, but I remember I went and saw this at the theater with my sister. You know, I was a kid, I don't know, but the soundtrack didn't like bump me when I watched it. You know, when I was too young to probably know this difference, and I fucking loved it. I really enjoyed the movie, and it was right in my strike zone. The whole fantasy medieval thing, I was really interested in. It didn't have the edge of like a Conan or, you know, any of that, but I really enjoyed it. But rewatching it, the soundtrack is it's like nails on a chalkboard. It completely takes me out, and it completely takes you out of the story every time it comes on.
Yeah, it's a movie that, as much as I loved it as a kid, I can't rewatch it. It pushes me out every time, and there's a lot to like about this. So I've talked to you before about, you know, like you grew up in like the crazy religious household like I did. R-rated movies are out. That's like, you know, you're not allowed to watch R-rated movies. So Ladyhawke was one of those rare movies where it's medieval, it's kind of fantasy, it has sword fights and action, and it was still PG. So I watched the shit out of this movie because I was allowed to. We were allowed to watch it, right? So I probably saw this movie a dozen times or more.
Did you have the VHS or what did you have?
So I saw it at the theater like you did, and then I think it was one of those ones where when you're in the video store and there's nothing else that you want, you just grab Ladyhawke.
It was a go-to.
Because you knew your parents weren't going to give you any shit about it. So it's like, oh, I really want to watch Conan, but that's R, and they're not going to let me do that. So let me grab some Ladyhawke here, right? Yeah, so it was one of those movies. So I watched it a ton.
I've always had such fond memories of Ladyhawke. It's one of those things that I think upon fondly. This last rewatch, and maybe I should have rewatched it with this soundtrack. I still enjoyed it. I still love the things that I loved about it, but I didn't love it as much. It didn't age as well as like some of the other things. Like we watched Planes, Trains, and Automobiles last week, and that movie is better to me than when it was when I first saw it.
Yeah,
aged better. But this one kind of suffered a little bit, and I think if it did have, well, there's two things, and I guess maybe you should set up the story before we get into the story.
Okay, yeah. So Ladyhawke is an '80s Richard Donner medieval, sort of with an edge of fantasy to it, about a knight and his love who have been cursed by this like evil priest. And the curse by day, the knight is a human, but by night he's a wolf. And his love, by day she's a hawk, and by night she's a person. So they can never be together because they're on opposite hours when they're humans. And the only time they ever get to see each other both in human form is at dawn and at dusk for just a few seconds, right? And this is the curse he's put them in. And the knight winds up pairing up with the knight played by the amazing Rutger Hauer. At the peak of Rutger Hauer, pairs up with a thief who has escaped from the dungeons of this priest, played by Matthew Broderick at the height of Matthew Broderick. So you got peak Rutger Hauer, you got peak Matthew Broderick, and the lady love is played by peak Michelle Pfeiffer. So you got like this amazing cast, right? All these actors. Michelle Pfeiffer has never been more beautiful than she is in this movie. Rutger Hauer's never been more badass. Matthew Broderick is funny and clever and witty and all that stuff in the best kind of Matthew Broderick way. So everything about this should be great.
There's some wonderful eye acting in this movie. The most beautiful set of eyes, like Rutger Hauer's Baby Blues and Michelle Pfeiffer's. I'm like, Jesus Christ. I get lost into his eyes when it's daytime, and then I get lost in her eyes at night. And I'm just lost in eyes all over the place. And, Matthew Broderick his name is Philippe, who's a Frenchman who has kind of like a New York English accent that he's kind of going. And you know what? It works. I think he's great in the movie. I really enjoy him. This is like him really like warming up to be Ferris Bueller. And he's fantastic. This was like him being a hot up and coming movie star. Ferris Bueller's like, he is a movie star. But I do think like sometimes, like, I mean, get a voice coach, Broderick. Like, get just a little hint of something that puts me back in medieval time. The 80s was a lot of lazy acting. You know,
it was fairly lazy. Well, and it was lazy because 80s movie producers didn't think their audience would notice.
Because they didn't notice. They were like,
notice, so their audience wasn't going to notice. Nobody will notice that.
Yeah, nobody noticed. And by the way, he could be from anywhere. Like, change his origin, change where he's from, and then because he was kind of trying to do an English accent. It's like Les Mis. Like, you go see Les Mis, and it's like, why do they all have English accent? This is the French Revolution. Like, why is everybody they were clear? You know what's going on? But his whole conversations with God, I thought were really funny, and the fact that he kept going back on his promises. And then when he says to Rutger Hauer, he's like, "You saved my life, but I have no honor," and like I can't return.
Well, and so you're talking about Matthew Broderick's supposed to be a French guy, but he's got like this New York, this like Bronx accent. Rutger Hauer's character's name is Etienne de Navarre, which is Stephen from Navarre, and Navarre is in Spain. So Rutger Hauer is supposed to be a Spaniard. Right. He's supposed to be a Spanish knight, and he's got a German accent.
Right.
So you got the Bronx guy who's French, you got the German guy who's Spanish. So everybody's accent is just all over the place.
I'm going to tell you who was almost that part. There's two people, and then you just flash response: better movie, same level of movie, or worse movie. Okay. Ready? Yeah. Sean Connery.
I think the same but different.
Kurt Russell.
I think Kurt Russell is worse. I don't think Kurt Russell pulls this one off.
Okay, listen, I might get Kurt Russell's face tattooed on my chest. I'm a massive Kurt Russell fan. I'm not going to do that. Yeah. I was kidding. But I'm a massive Kurt Russell fan, and I would have to say that this might have been better with Rutger Hauer. Yes. My general rule is it's always going to be better with Kurt Russell in it. But this one, he's a bit too contemporary, and he's damn sure not going to put in the work. So,
and this would have been 80s Kurt Russell, so he would have been sporting the mullet, and
nothing wrong with a mullet. And what's interesting about Rutger Hauer in this, he has such a palpable presence. He's so powerful on screen. He lights up the screen. I think if this movie was a hit, like they thought it was going to be, Rutger Hauer could have had a different trajectory. Tom Hanks talks about early on in his career, he did not know that he could say no to movies because he struggled so long as an actor. And then he did Splash, and then he started working, and he didn't know, I mean, for years, like all the way up before, all the way past Money Pit and, you know, all those Turner and Hooch, all those movies he did in the 80s. He said, one day I realized, oh, wait, I don't have to do everything they offer me. I can say no. Well, I don't think anybody had that talk with Rutger Hauer because he has some real clout. Like he had some, you know, Blade Runner, Ladyhawke, you know, I guess these movies didn't do well, but he had a platform that if he really was strategic and like put his mind, he could have created something different than what his career ended up being.
Well, we've talked about this before. I think somebody convinced Rutger Hauer in the 80s that he should try to become an action star.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a mistake. Because then he did a couple of really terrible sort of 80s action movies. And I think that really damaged his career, unfortunately. I don't know why somebody tried to convince him of that. I don't know if it was an agent or somebody in his team was like, yeah, you should be the next, you know, Stallone or whatever it was they were trying to talk him into. It never worked for him. He was a much more nuanced actor than that. He had real acting chops, and trying to turn himself into like a cheesy 80s action star with like one-liners after you blow a dude up. It just never worked. It was never believable.
I thought you were about to say, one-liners after you blow a dude. I was like, what were some of those one-liners?
Are the kind of movies you're getting talked into.
Yeah, those are the movies that I'm doing. Oh, but you know where I think he's at his best? What I think he's in my favorite Rutger Hauer performance is The Hitcher. And I think him as the villain in horror movies is his sweet spot. And I wish he would have done a little more of that because him playing that unhinged guy in The Hitcher was terrifying. He was terrifying. He was terrifying. He carried that movie on his back. And and even like him playing the straight man hero, what makes him interesting is there's always something a little askew about him. There's always something like behind that guy's eyes, this is a little bit off.
There's an edge to him. Yeah. I mean, and in Ladyhawke, since we're talking about Ladyhawke, you know, he plays a knight, right? So your picture of the knight is noble and honorable and all that stuff, even though that's bullshit. That's like a fictionalized version of what knights actually were. But that is what people think of when they think of a knight, right?
Between Two Fires is more of like a realistic look at what
Between Two Fires has a more realistic version of what knights were. But even in Ladyhawke, he's got an edge to him. Like he's scary. You understand why Matthew Broderick's a little scared of him.
Yeah. And he's held off for 3 years trying to find a way into Acula. And they've been kind of living on the lam, him and Michelle Pfeiffer trying to get in there. I will say though, Ty, and you might disagree with me, there's two things about this movie that's like nails on the chalkboard. The score, which we've talked about a lot, and the action in this, I don't think is good. I think the action scenes and the stuff, it has my pet peeves in it. And the thing is, Dick Donner is one of our great action directors. You know, there's not a better action cop movie than Lethal Weapon. And they had the sword, the guy that I can't remember his name right now, but the guy that did their sword choreography is the guy that was in a lot of great, like Willow, like, you know, Val Kilmer and Willow, like his sword fights in there was fantastic.
They were awesome.
They're
the best part of the movie is Val Kilmer's sword fighting.
Exactly. And, you know, like when Rutger Hauer first saves Matthew Broderick and, you know, he's running around and with that cheesy soundtrack and he shows up, it works when they see him and they're all intimidated by him because he was the captain of the guard. He's the baddest of them all. And then he shoots the crossbow, shoots him in the arm. And this is always a pet peeve for me. The other guy has the drop on him. He doesn't see him, shoots, but he misses by a mile and it hits right next to him. And then Rutger Hauer just looks over and goes, and shoots him like there's nothing dynamic or like him like scoping. There's nothing that makes me feel. And then when they start the action scenes in the sequence, it's just so it's just like how many times I wish we could go back and like watch and say how many times he kicked somebody in the ass. Like they'll like they swing and he hits the sword down and he just kicks him in the ass and then they're gone. They're off screen. They don't come back. It's like that ass kick took him out of the fight. You know, it's like, that's not going to happen.
I wondered about this later. Now, when I was younger and watching this movie, I didn't think about it, but rewatching it later in life, what I wondered was the direction he was giving or the direction he got from the studio or whatever. Rutger Hauer can't kill anybody. He needs to stay the good guy. So we don't ever want to see him kill anybody. And when you're a medieval knight and everybody's carrying a fucking sword and that's how you fight with each other, it's very hard to make believable fights where nobody gets hurt or nobody gets killed, right? When you're waving big, sharp pieces of metal at each other. And so you wind up with this sort of, like you said, the kick in the butt, like,
yeah. But then they're gone. So they're like out of the fight.
Yeah, they fell out of the world. Let me tell you this story because I think it's related.
The world. They fell into the crash nets.
They fell into the crash nets. He just Burka pecked them right off the world.
Sorry, patrons. I didn't expect to laugh that hard. I was
like, so let me tell you this story because I think this is a related story and it's happening around the same time. So around the same time that Ladyhawke was being made, my friend George Martin was working on a TV show called Beauty and the Beast. I don't remember. You remember Beauty and the Beast from the 80s?
Okay. Our boy Ron Perlman.
Ron Perlman, obviously. It was Ron Perlman's star-making show.
Yeah.
So George was working on that. And he's told me a bunch of stories about working on that show. And one of them he talked about is the constant fight they had with the studio that Vincent wasn't allowed to kill anybody. Every time Vincent was fighting with guys, they'd be like, well, Vincent's a good guy. We don't want him to actually hurt anybody. We don't want him to kill anybody. And George would, they'd be having this fight. And George would say, guys, he's a lion man. He's got claws. When he swipes at people, he's tearing them open with his claws. That's how he fights. And the studio would say, well, no, we want it to be more like the Hulk. The Hulk never killed anybody. He destabilized them. And so that was the code word the studio used for he should just knock them down and then we don't notice them anymore. They've been destabilized, right? When I watch Ladyhawke, I'm sitting there thinking, were they having that exact conversation? Well, he can't kill anybody. He knocks them down. He destabilizes them.
Yeah.
Because that's what he's doing. He's kicking people in the butt. He's knocking them down. He never actually hits anybody with his sword. And what's even more annoying about that is early on, we see he's got this gigantic two-handed sword, which is like the sword of his forefathers, right? That is the weapon they carried into battle. And he never fucking uses it. He never uses it.
There's daggers on the middle of the sword going this way. Then it's like Chekhov's gun on the thing. You need to use that fucking dagger. I like when you see it, like, oh, I want to see it rip people apart with that thing. Or like, if he goes all the way through, what do the daggers do? Like if they come out the other side, is it like a hollow point bullet and just explodes out of their bag? None of that happens.
No.
None of that happens.
None of that happens.
It's like
he uses the sword one time and he throws it, which is the worst way to effectively use a sword.
It's like the A-Team, right? They all have like these fully automatic weapons and like just shoot out in the thing. Not one person dies in the whole thing. No. And
people get destabilized though.
Yeah, they get destabilized. Yeah, but okay, you brought up George R. R. Martin, and patrons, our listeners are probably tired of these conversations about fight consistency. But you brought up George R. R. Martin. Game of Thrones is excellent at this. The Hound, you know how good the Hound is, and it is proportionate with all the people he fights. And then when he faced off with Gwendolyn Christie, is that her name?
Yeah, Brienne.
Brienne. Then when he faced off with Brienne, and it was a fucking grudge match.
It was a brawl.
It was a brawl. And then you realize like they built her skills and then his skills to where you did not know who was going to win. Yeah. And it was so satisfying to watch and so drawn out. And then when the Hound goes up against his brother and he has this emotional grudge that he has, and his brother's unstoppable, but he has an edge of something from his past. So it's phenomenal at this, what we're talking about here. So when I see Rutger Hauer show up and the guard, they are intimidated by him, they are impressed by him, I want to see why, because he's not doing anything different than they're doing. One of the things that I also would have liked to see more with this story, which I thought was interesting, is that one of his guards recognized him and and you could see that there was respect there. And then the other guy pushes him on his sword and he kills his friend. But I wanted to see a little bit more of like the captain coming back and them responding, like a few of his friends like coming back to him, you know?
Maybe he just had mastered that very rare Eastern martial art where you can knock people unconscious by kicking them in the butt. Like it's like the dim mock, but it's the butt mock.
Like
right?
when he was
like there's a pressure point in the ass where if you kick it perfectly, the person just gets knocked unconscious.
It's like Kill Bill, that thing that they do.
It's the 5-point heel to the ass technique.
It gets right in the sphincter, closes it all down, and closes up the colon all the way up to your esophagus. But the you know when he's charging the bishop in the cathedral and people running one by one. How many people does he kick in the ass? So he pushes this one guy over and kicks him in the ass, and then he kicks him off camera, and he's done. He's not coming back.
Gone.
He's gone. He's gone. Maybe the guy was just so embarrassed that he got kicked in the ass and he fell on his face that he was like, I'm fucking over this shit.
Well, Rutger used the butt mock on him, you know?
Yeah.
Instantly knocked him unconscious.
Maybe Rutger has a dagger on the end of his boot, on the tip of his boot that we don't see. he rams it up the old cornhole, you know what I'm saying?
Well, that would suck.
Yeah.
So these are legitimate complaints. The fights are goofy. The soundtrack is terrible. And yet there is something incredibly moving and charming about this movie. In spite of that, the chemistry between Rutger Hauer and Matthew Broderick is great. Like they're so charming together. The even though it's brief, the chemistry between Rutger Hauer and Michelle Pfeiffer in the brief moments they get together is heart-wrenching. You know, like you really believe he loves her. You really believe that his entire life is dedicated to getting her back, right? That he's willing to die if he can free her from the curse she's under. You really believe all those things. Like there's a few moments in this which still resonate. You know, that the first time Matthew Broderick gets to see them at dawn when they're lying side by side and they get to see each other, you know, as dawn is coming, and he reaches out for her and then she disappears and becomes the hawk, right? That's really emotionally evocative. And, you know, later in the movie when she gets injured, when the hawk gets shot by the crossbow, and then you see her with when she's back in human form, you see the crossbow stuck in her shoulder. The intensity of his emotion, the intensity of his fear for her that she could die of this is very believable. His power as an actor definitely comes through. So in spite of all this cheesiness, there is something at the heart of this movie that still resonates.
Absolutely. I think at its heart, this movie's at its best when it's focused on the love story. And what's interesting about this movie is this was a time in the 80s where there was a lot of these fantasies and things, movies like this happening. And what separates this movie from Beastmaster or the countless other movies that you've forgotten about that have came out with the same thing is the performances of Rutger Hauer, Michelle Pfeiffer, Matthew Broderick, Impetus, what's his name? Leo McKern, John Wood. John Wood is a great bishop in this. And they just did War Games with Matthew Broderick.
Matthew McConaughey.
Yeah, Matthew McConaughey. They just did War Games with this, but so they're kind of reunited. But when Dick Donner read the script, he said the script was not good when he first read it. But when Impetus sits down with Matthew Broderick and he tells him the story of the curse and how they'll forever be together but forever apart. He said he loved that idea because there's so much built-in drama of this love story. And then you have Rutger Hauer, who you can feel his loneliness and his longing for her. And you can feel on her end when they're just savoring each word or what they said or the performances that they give. And then that great scene is really pays off when they have a brief glimpse of each other before they turn and they transform. And again, beautiful eye acting. It was like I was staring in 4 sunsets when there's the beautiful baby blues on the thing. But the power of the love that they have for each other and Matthew Broderick witnessing it then brings him on board with wanting to help them. in that situation. And also, you know, I think about the regret and the loneliness that the priest that has been exiled, who gave up their secret, and he is phenomenal in that part, in the sadness that he has. Now, my question to you is, did his revelations about the curse, he says that was a vision or a gift from God? Like, how did he figure out about the eclipse that it can't be day and it can't be night, but it has to be day and has to be night? How did he find out about I think he said it was.
I wasn't. I mean, there's also the possibility that he just figured out that that's the one time when both day and night are at the same time, right?
Because my understanding of it was Rutger Hauer wanted revenge, and he wanted to kill the bishop. He wanted to use Matthew Broderick to use his knowledge to get back into the fortress. But if you kill the bishop, then the curse is forever there. Right. So at this point, did he just give up trying to figure out a cure?
That's definitely the sense I got watching the movie, is that he doesn't think the curse can ever be lifted. So all he has left is revenge. And he just wants to go get the revenge. Yeah.
So was the deal worked out ahead of time that if he failed and you hear the bells, then kill the hawk?
Yeah.
Kill the girl? Like, did he run that by her?
Yeah, was she in on that?
Yeah, was she in on that decision? Because she was a hawk, you know, and then I'm sitting there and I'm like, hold on a minute. You know, so he's like, look, if I fail, she's not going to want to live without me. So you're going to have to kill her. When you're in there, I'm like, well, maybe she could go on to have some type of life.
I actually have that deal with all of my friends, that if I die, that they have to come kill Janae. She's not going to want to go on without me.
Is Janae armed?
She is.
What? How many fucking friends are you going to get taken out just to follow through on your wishes?
That's why I have a bunch of them with with that deal. They're going to do the Russian version.
Send them in,
they're going to have to send wave after wave of their own men.
And you're like, it's a small price to pay. Just wave of your friends. I'm at the back end of that wave though. Yeah.
Well, I mean, she's a deadly shot with a shotgun, but you only get 4 or 5 shots, and then you got to reload. That's your opportunity. That's when you get in.
So she'll probably take out 4 or 5 guys. So I'll be like seventh or 8th.
Yeah, you will definitely want to be the 6th or 7th in that group.
Yeah, 6th or 7th. Right. Yeah, but he's standing there with the knife, getting ready to take out the hawk, and I'm like, I don't understand that. I don't understand, if he fails, why kill the hawk?
I think the idea is that if the curse can never be lifted, that she won't want to live her life as half of a life, half the hawk and half a person. Like, if I had that curse, it would bug me that I had to be a hawk half the time. But
would it?
I don't know. The rest of the time, I could still have I could still do stuff.
Like, if you can fly over mountains and trees, and wouldn't that be kind of cool?
Sure, but they do give the impression that they don't keep their human intelligence when they're in the animal form.
Yeah.
So the trick would be, every night you would wake up, you'd be in a completely different spot with no idea how you got there.
Yeah,
that would be a little unsettling.
That was my 20s. And that's another thing I'm interested in, is because it did seem she did have the wherewithal when she was a hawk to attack people that were attacking him. And then when he was a wolf, he protected her. So it's almost like there's some semblance of consciousness within the animal, but maybe it's not fully there. I think maybe he thought that once he's gone, then there's nothing stopping that guy from tracking them down. So she would rather die than being with the bishop. But I just wish we had a scene where she was like, this is what I want to happen. If where he's just not unilaterally saying, listen, if I don't make it, she's not going to want to go on.
It is a woman in medieval times.
That's true.
It's very realistic for the times that the woman's opinion is not all that important.
What do you think of her role, like as a female role in the smack dab in the middle of the 80s? What do you think about her the role that she had at this time?
As an actor, you mean?
Yeah, like, you know, in the terms of like when people talk about fantasy movies in the 80s or whatever and how limited they were, I thought that this was a pretty, like, she had a lot of agency. She defended.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I think considering that this was made in the 80s and that it is about a medieval Europe and all that stuff, I think they gave Michelle Pfeiffer a fair amount of stuff to do. She is a bit damselly. She is. You know, I mean, her big move toward the end of the movie is getting wounded so that people can worry about her, which is a bit damselly. But her first interaction with Matthew Broderick, I think, is really good. She doesn't come across as a fainting, you know, flower. She comes across as she's tough. She knows what she wants.
Well, I think when Alfred Molina, when he shows up in the film and she sees that he's a wolf hunter and that he's out hunting wolves, when he takes off in the woods, she comes barreling out on that stallion after him, and she saves Rutger Hauer, and she throws his ass on a wolf trap, you know. And so there's some really great moments. And what I like too is, or what I thought was interesting in 1985, because did you ever read William Goldman's Adventures in the Screen Trade?
Yeah.
So you remember, you know, when he talks about writing for stars and like, you know, like how you have to give the description. He goes, it doesn't matter if the movie's good. It doesn't, but you need to give them all the good lines. They got to do all the good things and everything like that. But what was great about this movie, and maybe they could do it because Rutger Hauer's in it. They didn't have the, you know, they didn't have the Kevin Costner, like, okay, hey, you know, and he does this great example of a book about how actors steal other actors' lines. He does this thing, it's like, it's so spot on. It's so funny. But everybody saves everybody in this. Their little band of misfits, Michelle Pfeiffer, Rutger Hauer, Matthew Broderick, the priest, they all kind of depend and rely upon each other.
Yeah.
And they all save each other. You know, it's not Rutger Hauer coming through and just dominating and saving everyone. It's like he makes mistakes. He's vulnerable. He's in vulnerable position. They all come together and they
do you keep calling him Rutger Howard?
Rutger
Howard?
Rutger?
It's Rutger Hauer.
Oh,
Hauer.
Oh, okay. Like Rod Sterling? Rutger Howard.
It was funny because I kept thinking you were saying Howard, and I was like, he's not saying Howard, is he?
What you kept hearing a D?
Yeah.
You know I like a good D.
I know you do like a good D.
I'll put a little D in it if I can. Rutger Hauer. Rutger Hauer. You know what's funny is like I will morph names over.
Yes,
the more I say things, I'll just like morph. My kids' friends, I'm always like, and they're like, "Did you say who is that?" And I'm like, "That's not." And I'll add syllables and letters and everything.
That's what cracks me up because I know that you know the real thing. I know that you do.
Right.
Like, it's not that you don't know. It's just the more you say stuff, the more, like you said, it just starts morphing.
Yeah.
It's
because
very
we probably
funny.
have hours of podcast footage of us talking about him, and so anyway, yeah, Howard the Duck.
See, now there's a movie I would watch, Rutger Howard the Duck.
Did you do a rewatch before anytime near this podcast?
Yeah.
Okay. What did you?
Yeah, I mean, it was a few months ago, but yes.
How was your rewatch experience?
This isn't going to surprise you, but I have all the same complaints you do. The action directing is very haphazard. It feels very sort of like the 80s Disney version of action. But what's weird about it is, whenever Rutger Hauer gets in a fight with other knights, which should be the most violent things in the movie, right? Because knights are trained warriors carrying around pointy sticks. People are going to get hurt. Those are always completely bloodless. And they're always like that 80s Disney goofy, like you point out, people getting kicked in the butt. But then you have scenes like Michelle Pfeiffer knocking the guy under the bear trap.
Yeah.
You have these other scenes where you're like, okay, this is actually much more in keeping with the tone that the movie should have. So it's a weird mix, which I find very odd. I don't know. It feels like a movie that was heavily influenced by what I call studio notes. It feels like a movie with a lot of studio notes.
Yeah.
And
I think there was a lot of writers on this movie at different times, and it feels it. Like there's certain plot device moments. Like I was talking to Joseph about it before the podcast started, where Matthew Broderick is a savvy little thief, and he is a survivalist. And he knows how to be, he's Mouse. He's the guy that can get out of any tough situation or anything like that. When he kind of starts bragging and, at the thing, and he's like,
bragging at the bar.
I'm buying a drink for everybody because I'm the guy who escaped from Aquila. He's not that far from Aquila. It hasn't been that long.
No, it's like you could see Aquila right there. You could see it just over the hill.
Yeah, you could just see it. It's still behind him, and he's and he does that. And I'm like, oh, this seems a little plot devicey for me. It doesn't feel properly motivated. It kind of rubs you the wrong way. And there's a few of those things. But to go back to your point, there are a few of those things that seem a bit, kind of clunky, kind of cheesy. But the movie still works because the things that do work on a very high level.
Yeah. Yeah. Anytime it is Michelle Pfeiffer and Mouse, or Rutger Hauer and Mouse, or any of the three of them and the priest, the banished priest, those moments are all really well acted and emotionally intense. And those moments almost feel like a different movie.
Yeah.
Right. Then you go to the sort of the Disney, and then you were riding on the horse and we're kicking people in the butt. I guess the word I'm looking for, because I say this a lot, is it is a tonally inconsistent movie.
Yes.
The tone shifts a bunch.
Because like Leo McKern and John Wood, like those are like phenomenal Rutger Hauer, Michelle Pfeiffer, Matthew Broderick, just terrific performances. But everybody else in the movie was like in a different movie. And the head of the guard and the Knightsmen or whatever, like they were just, it didn't have the same resonance as the other one had. How beautiful is Michelle Pfeiffer? I mean, her presence on this and on the screen when her reveal when she turns her head and she's wearing that black cloak is one of the most powerful cinematic faces that exist. She is a beautiful woman.
Yeah, and as I said at the beginning, I think this movie is the most beautiful I've ever thought Michelle Pfeiffer was. Mm-hmm. It's not just her looks, because obviously she is one of the most beautiful actors in Hollywood and has been for, 40 years now. So she's always been beautiful. It is the combination of her natural beauty, but also the performance that she gives as this character, and her combination of toughness and vulnerability because she is tough and vulnerable in the same package in this movie, and the longing that she has. All of those things combine to make her one of the most entrancing presences in movies.
She had to do a self-tape, and for this movie, Dick Donner saw her in Grease 2 and was like, she might be interesting. So she did a self-tape, and she would cut to her parakeet and do the lines that's like the Ladyhawke, and she would do the lines, and he thought it was so funny that she ended up getting the
really
job.
Funny.
But I'm like, how many other directors would have been like, what the fuck is this? And like, you know what I'm saying? Like, only every now and then something ballsy like that pays off.
I just love the reality of the business. I mean, you work in the business, the reality of the business is there was a time when Michelle Pfeiffer still had to self-tape.
I know.
That's a weird idea, right?
Yeah.
Like,
and you think
I'm sure she's been offer only for like 40 years now.
Probably since this movie. But if you think about it, Grease 2, and then this was probably I think this was right after Scarface. Scarface might have not have came out yet. So she was on the cusp. She was about to happen because after Scarface, obviously that was a huge boost for her. Yeah. And then I think Tequila Sunrise was in there pretty soon, which was such a sexy movie.
And Tequila Sunrise is like early 90s, I think. Is it 88?
88.
Okay. Witches of Eastwick came after Ladyhawke. Then I think it was really Married to the Mob was where she really was bona fide.
Yeah. That was a big hit.
In the rewatchables, they do Apex Mountain. What do you think Michelle Pfeiffer's Apex Mountain was? Is it Grease 2? Well, it's hard for somebody that's been just respected and worked for so long. It's really like a steady rise and a steady staying. It wasn't like one big fluky thing. But
no, and the thing with Michelle Pfeiffer is she managed, like a lot of actors who come in based primarily on their looks, they have a very clear career path, especially women. You know, they come in, they're the hot ingenue, the hot new starlet. They do a ton of stuff. They reach sort of that peak. And then as they age, they just sort of disappear. And then they show up 20 years later playing somebody's mom. Michelle Pfeiffer is one of those rare actors who came into Hollywood primarily because she was so stunningly beautiful and had a really interesting career that didn't seem to have many lulls in it.
I'm looking at it right now. She had quite a run. You have from Witches of Eastwick, Married to the Mob, Tequila Sunrise, Dangerous Liaisons, The Fabulous Beggar Boys. I love that movie. Yep. Do you remember that movie?
Of course.
The Russian House, Frankie and Johnny with Al Pacino, Batman Returns. I don't remember Love Field, The Age of Innocence, Wolf, Dangerous Minds, Up Close and Personal, One Fine Day. So she just put her head down and
she just worked.
Yeah,
she just worked and didn't. I mean, she's Michelle Pfeiffer. She's like 70 now, and she's still beautiful. So Michelle Pfeiffer has always been beautiful. There was never a moment where she wasn't. But she took interesting roles that were not just the pretty girl roles, right? And I think that's the key to that sort of career longevity is she got in the business because she's beautiful, but she's also talented. And so she took roles that utilized her talent more than she relied on just being the prettiest girl in the room. And that's the key to having such career longevity, because she's undeniably talented as well. And so she really was able to leverage that into a really steady career.
Sometimes God does give with both hands.
Yes. Yes.
And he was bountiful to her. But I do think that's an interesting question, because I will say with Matthew Broderick, I do think Ferris Bueller is his apex mountain. I think that was probably the top of his powers as a movie star, as an actor. What was the Election? Like, Election was probably one of his most prestigious moments.
Yeah.
And, you know, Broderick has always worked. He's a really talented guy, and he's really good in everything he does. But he was building to be a young, hot movie star. And this was one of the building blocks. But when he did Ferris Bueller's, I think that was his apex at that point.
Yeah. I mean, when you mentioned Matthew Broderick, everybody pictures Ferris Bueller.
Yeah. Sometimes they call him Ferris Bueller. Like, sometimes it'll be like, who's in the movie? And it's like Ferris Bueller, Sarah Jessica, you know, like, and it's like, you mean Matthew Broderick? But I got a hard out. So let's do our top 5. Joseph.
All righty. Hold on one second.
Okay. Top 5 worst film scores.
So I don't think Titanic has a terrible score. I think just that song at the end is terrible.
Yeah.
The Heart Go On song.
It was very hard because there's a lot of soundtracks where it was just like, it was cool to hate on it. Like, I thought you guys would find it funny. I actually saw Rocky 4 in a lot of lists of hated. Now, the reasoning was comparing it to the original Rocky score, like basically saying it was just bastardization.
The best Rocky score is Rocky 3.
Yeah. I concur. I think we've done a podcast on Rocky 4. I'm a huge supporter of the Rocky 4 soundtrack. It's like if you take Sylvester Stallone's Sweat and you take a lock of Chuck Norris's hair and you put it in a blender and then you pour tequila in the blender and it comes out. That's the Rocky 4 soundtrack. And if you listen to the Rocky 4 soundtrack, you don't need to take steroids. You just need to listen to the Rocky 4 soundtrack.
Yeah.
So I don't know why. That's
obviously, Ladyhawke is going to be my number one. There's no question. It's the worst.
And the thing is, so the thing with Titanic, it might not be our favorite song, but there's a lot of people that love that song.
That song. That's true.
And that song really hit with the movie. Ladyhawke was never, even when it came out.
Yep.
Everybody hated that soundtrack. You go back and it's like universal. Even when it came out, it wasn't like, oh, this was cool and it didn't age well. It just never worked.
I saw a lot of hate for Pearl Harbor. And I'll admit, it's kind of like a cheesy, over the top.
It's pretty cheesy. Yeah, Pearl Harbor's soundtrack is pretty cheesy. I agree with that. And it's a movie that I really don't like. So, and by the way, Cool as Ice definitely needs to be on this list. Because talk about a terrible vanity project. Talk about the worst vanity project ever, because it was like Vanilla Ice going, "Hey, I'm hot right now. Let's make a movie where I'm the coolest guy who's ever lived. And in every scene, all I'm doing is being the coolest guy who's ever lived." Oh my God. So the reason Die Another Day is on there is because of that terrible Madonna song.
One thing, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, I actually, this is interesting to me because John Hughes is like the king of movie soundtracks and movie scores. And it wasn't great. And he didn't even have, I mean, I guess, did he have that song, Every Time You Go Away? That song?
That was in there, yeah.
Okay, so he had one song, but he's usually like really good at finding the right moment, the right song. Okay, Ladyhawke, Pearl Harbor, Cool as Ice, Planes, Trains, and I cannot believe that they made that movie. I feel like I need to take a shower.
It's horrifying. It's horrifying. It may be one of the worst things that was ever made.
The Room. Why's The Room on there? Oh, The Room. Sorry, never mind. Sorry. Yeah. I'm thinking the other one.
I would say I would have a vote for Wild Wild West.
Oh yeah,
it's a terrible movie.
It's
a terrible movie with a terrible soundtrack.
Okay, that is you. I didn't see that at the bottom. That is mine. Because when that movie came out, they played that song over and over in the video, and it was kind of like, in Mean Girls when like stop trying to make fetch happen. Like it's like stop trying to make this movie happen.
Yes.
So that's our top 5.
Yeah.
I would say
the patron top 5. They got a couple that you guys had.
Yeah, they got a couple.
Cool as Ice.
Yep.
Ladyhawke, and honorable mention Pearl Harbor.
Thank you guys for hanging out. We love you. Miss you. Say goodbye, Ty. Goodbye, Ty.